these vessels start becoming more body-like. And you know, there's definitely some references that came up, and actually there was a guy that last night who approached me, he's like, these are really quite lewd. You know, there's some really kind of things going on here. And he was having a go at it. He goes, you're lucky you're showing in Denver because these are legal here. But it was really quite good. But for me, I feel like I am kind of infusing a little bit of those sort of sexual references or the really kind of visceral body kinds of things. And one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is about technology and also how it addresses our very human desires. And I was listening to the radio program, and William Gibson, who's a science fiction writer, who wrote Neuromancer and Johnny Mnemonic and all those sort of things. And he coined the phrase cyberpunk, which is a really popular term now. But he was talking about how technology, all along its history, at some point addresses our sexual desires. It crops up for whatever reason. And those are some interesting things that are going on. And I feel like it makes total sense that, you know, the digital era has jumped upon this. And okay, maybe Ms. Pac-Man isn't the sexiest thing, but here's an example of, this is called Oh My Body, which is a vibrator that you can hook up to your iPod, if you wanted that. And then this is the new sex doll. It's called the Real Doll. And there are these really interesting kinds of things that are going on with our technology and how we're kind of using it to mediate or try and find these things that are hard to find between human and human contact. It's really easy to find through technology because there's no baggage. Maybe there's a carrying bag that you can put it back into, but you know what I mean. And so, you know, this is this guy, what's his name, David Levy, talks about this in Love Plus Sex with Robots, which is kind of an interesting book. Anyhow, I digress. So the work has metamorphosed, and what I've been showing you is really the early stuff and sort of the groundwork that I've been laying down. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of the work that's been going on. One of the first sort of steps, I usually call these are Manga Ormolu version something. So it started off as Manga Ormolu version 2.0. And then from 2.0 it went to 3.0. And 3.0 became more of this mixed media thing where I was definitely using a lot more wires and cables and that sort of thing. And what I was thinking about is that a lot of the work that I do, I kind of think of it within the context of trompe-l'oeil, which is a tradition where it's French for fool the eye. And for me, like, I'm making these ceramic parts that kind of look like plastic or metal. And then, in a way, I'm kind of using ceramics to pretend to be, you know, these really traditional porcelains. And actually, this clay body that I'm using is a low-temperature clay body, and porcelain is a very high-temperature clay body. And I often refer to it as ghetto porcelain, because it kind of, you know, it's this really low-fire, kind of low-brow material. So when I introduce the wires and cables, it kind of helps with that illusion to kind of get people thinking about these other things. Now, the other kind of thing, and this is another example of that kind of mixed media that I've been doing, and you know, looking at topiary gardens and also thinking about bonsai and stuff like that, and that kind of stuff into the work. The other thing that I've been doing, and we're kind of getting more into this body of work, is what I call quickening of the vessel, where the vessel is becoming more liquid, it's becoming more body-like or whatever, and more malleable. And I think as the work was progressing, I was thinking about, you know, what these things mean. What does the Chinese vessel mean? What does the robotic parts mean for me? And definitely the Chinese vessel it became like a metaphor. It was a metaphor for culture. It was a metaphor for history. And the robotic parts were obviously a metaphor for technology, or a metaphor for what we hope our technology could bring for us. And when I was thinking about that, and I was talking about earlier about how history and information is being changed or mediated through technology, I felt like, well, this relationship that I've created with these objects, it's just like the robot part and the vessel part, and nothing else kind of happened between those two. And I thought, well, that's not how things really work. But culture is this moving and pulling and changing kind of thing. Even with language, if you think about that, it's always kind of going up and down and moving and shifting. And I thought, well, I think my work should reflect that. And so I started creating these vessels and then having them move and pull apart. And when I was thinking, I'm such a fanboy. I love science fiction movies and stuff like that. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about this body of work, I was also thinking about, I don't know if you remember seeing the movie Terminator 2. There was the Terminator 2000 or something like that, was this liquid Terminator that could shape and shift and change and disguise itself and whatever. And that was something that I thought was really, really quite fascinating. And on a kind of a side note, I thought it was interesting, as a monster, to have a shape-shifting monster is pretty interesting, because monsters generally reflect what, as a culture, we fear the most, and having a shape-shifting kind of ambiguous kind of creature is kind of terrifying. And in Canada, we're always grappling with our own cultural identity. We're always trying to go, well, what is Canadian? It's no longer sort of the bearded, sort of Caucasian lumberjack, or the mounted police. It doesn't work, because it's becoming this really sort of multicultural kind of system. And so it's hard to point at somebody and say, well, that's Canadian, or that's Canadian. It's all this kind of interesting thing. So anyway, I digress. So the work, definitely, I started having a lot of fun with parts looking like they're bubbling out, sort of, thinking about like those lava lamps or whatever, and having those things kind of change a lot. And then having things pinching in and pull and all this sort of stuff. And I'm always looking for reference material, and I remember seeing this, and I thought, because like a lot of these are kind of body references, and this is a speaker system that you strap on when you're having a baby, so you can, your in utero fetus can party on down, I guess. I don't know. It's fun, but it's interesting. Like again, it's like that body and technology kind of embracing one another in this really little interesting way. But anyway, so again, with a lot of the work, I'm kind of looking at those things, and I've started getting into yoga a lot more, and when you're in those really peculiar postures and you're looking at your stomach and they're doing these interesting rolls, and you're just like, oh, that looks kind of interesting. And these are the things that are kind of finding their way back into my work, for sure. And yeah, so these are some other examples of the work. And then, always kind of playing with different forms, and this is a plate form that I did. And these were definitely inspired by, I don't know if anybody ever seen brake pads on your car, if you've ever had the wheel off. I really love that. I think it's kind of a nice, cool sort of form. And again, playing with more mixed media stuff. This is more recent kind of work here, and I've started getting into stands, like having these little stands that I get from Chinatown in Vancouver that are just gorgeous. And I think definitely that stuff started cropping up more when I went to Japan, because, oh my God, the way they present stuff in Japan, like if you buy something, they take it and they put it in a bag. No, it probably comes in a bag, like off the shelf, like if you buy cookies. So let's say you buy cookies and it's already in a bag, and they'll take it and they'll put it and they'll wrap it up, and then they'll take that and they'll put it in a box, and they'll close the box, and then they'll take the box, and then they'll put it in a bag, and they'll be like, here you go, and you're like, okay. But it's so awesome, it's so amazing. I remember I even bought a book, I bought a David Sedaris book, because I wanted something to read, and they wrapped it, like, I don't know if anybody remember doing this when they were a kid. Well, my mom made me do this when I was a kid, but when we got textbooks, she made us wrap it in newsprint. That's what they did with the books when you bought it, and I was just like, this is so badass. So there we go. So presentation definitely is something that's come up in the new work. So I'm continuing with all things Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is my last reference of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was thinking with ceramics. Ceramics is we have a lot of things that we're trying to talk about. Obviously, there's that body reference kind of thing that we talk about. There's another thing that a lot of ceramic people talk about, which is the inside and the outside of the vessel. And especially with functional work, like when you have sort of a large bowl, if somebody decorates the inside of it, then they're kind of acknowledging when the vessel is empty and also when it's full and blah, blah, blah. So it's something that we talk about a lot. And it's something that I was thinking about with my work, is that for the most part, the manga parts were always on the exterior of the vessel. And I thought, well, what would happen if I sort of switched that up? And I made it look as though the robotic parts were underneath it. And I was thinking about the original Terminator, which is hard to believe it came out in 1984. That's when the original Terminator came out. But there's something really beautiful about towards the end of the movie when Arnie's face is bashed up, and you could see the robot underneath. And like, you probably knew he was a robot because he was a terrible